4, 3, 2, rewind.
Rise of the Fallen, MMO Quest, Pantheon. Once again, time to pledge. Very excited. We're here to talk. Let's get this party to
share your thoughts.
Co-host Derek.
Weekly Adventures, co-host Desiree. We're almost professional.
Full disclosure.
Dangerous combination. Creating content and optimizations. We've got a lore video coming. Cannot wait, which is all about drone fast and some sort of cake. Mail on a Sunday.
News and notes.
Schedule for this week.
Hot cocoa. All these people.
Supports the show. Adventuring party.
You ready? Let's go.
Let me take a deep breath. Greetings, friends. It's time once again to rewind with your friends from Pantheon Plus. For anyone who's new here, welcome, and sit back as we give you the latest and greatest news and notes about Pantheon Rise of the Fallen and its ongoing development. Today, on episode 140, we listen in on our friends at Disparate Worlds and harvest the beans they shook free from VR's lead designer, Chris Joppa Perkins. We give you our weekly dose of community content, and we revisit some lore about a nomadic people called the Aridola. We've recently returned from a visit to Terminus, and we cannot wait for the next one. In the meantime, let's stay Pantheon patient. So join me, Derek, and my stoic co-host, Desiree, for this week's Rewind. So Desiree, it's so cold here, we had to get chapstick for the dog's paws.
Oh,
if you can believe that. His poor little paws, they're all cracked, and he goes outside and it's so cold that he's got to get his business done in he's got a 2-minute window to get it done. And so by the time he's done, he's got one paw off the ground and he's waiting, and he's sometimes we got to go pick him up and bring him in, but sometimes he just runs, but his little paws are all chapped.
It's so sad, but so cute, but so sad. Yeah. I can picture it in my head.
And the funny thing is that the only way to really inspect them and to put the stuff on his paws is to get him to roll over and for a belly rub.
Aww.
So he's just one person rubbing the belly and the other person's got this chapstick bar putting it on his paws. It's quite hilarious. So yeah, that's what's going on here. How are you doing?
It's doing fine. I coming down from last weekend, that's
me too.
It's such a crazy thing, and I don't know about you, it already feels like so long ago. It's this weird time warp that's happened this week, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with the days getting longer a little bit, because there's more daylight going on now, and it's a little brighter earlier and lasts a little longer into the evening, so maybe it just feels that way, but
maybe, if I ever saw the sun,
you must leave the cave once in a while, doesn't it?
It's true. It's true.
You know who's always sunny, though?
Oh,
our adventuring party. Yes, that's right. The faithful are back for another week. We've got Ziplocs on the Darkmer Rogue, got Sparrow on the Elf Ranger, Bounty Code on the Human Wizard, Screech on the Scar Bard, Wiki Woo on the Human Enchanter, Shuriken on the Dwarf Cleric, Horsosaurus on the Human Warrior, Churro Dude on the Halfling Dire Lord, Fury Wrath on the Archai Summoner, Pavejo on the Gnome Wizard, Sarah Avienda on the Elf Ranger, Galarian Moonsong on the Elf Ranger, and Annoying Llama on the Human Monk. So all those fine folks have joined the Patreon campaign, and you can too if you want to go check it out. There's a link in the description that you can follow. We've got a couple options there, different levels that you might want to be interested in. If you are not interested in the Patreon, you can also add your name to the adventure party that you'll see on the graphic and the scrolling banner across the screen during the main part of the show by leaving a super chat or a super thanks and leaving your name and future Pantheon race and class in that super chat or super thanks, or just send it during chat during the premiere. We can get it that way too. So
we're very flexible that way.
yes, we are flexible in our gratitude methods. So either way, we very much do appreciate the support for the show. It's what makes us tick. What keeps us going week after week when, sometimes it can get a little bit of a slog sometimes, but we're always inspired and grateful for you fine folks who support the show. So having said all that, Desiree, are you ready to go?
I am floored and ready to go.
This week in Visionary Realms News and Notes. All right, so the news this week in Pantheon's world comes from an interview with our friends at Disparate Worlds. So they scored an interview with Chris Perkins, and that went up on their channel this week. It is a two-parter. It's got about 2 hours of the interview, maybe a little less than that, but it's a very informative conversation. If you haven't checked out the video, I highly recommend going and doing so ahead of time. But if you haven't, we can also fill you in on some of the highlights and go over it. That's what we're going to be talking about. We've made some notes and we're going to discuss what was talked about with Joppa. So basically, like, the focus of the show in the interview was really heavily leaning into the social aspects of Pantheon and how that's going to be addressed in game, right? And that's kind of music to my ears. It's one of the things I think about with this game a lot, other than the visuals and all the stuff that we, talk about more regularly. I often wonder how it's going to work, how the social stuff that they want to emphasize going to work, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's one of the big topics kind of like around Pantheon is incorporating a social experience that we've gotten from classic games into a new game. But like I gotta say, dude, there are so many, like, the way the show started, there's so many great topics, like, community size affecting how players relate to each other, which I wish we could even had time to get into, because that was like super interesting. The tenure of players in the community, because like I'm sure both of you and I know, like, we've got like veterans in our community are totally different than people that are new, and just how they relate to each other. And like Sakari was just like on it to start out, so I knew it was going to be a great interview with like so many great talking points just right from the beginning. But really there's more than just the community stuff, the social stuff. Like, there was quite a few beans dropped. Some of them might be more controversial than others.
Let's say worthy of discussion. Let's frame it that way, because like, it's funny because people who have been around this community for a while and following this game, some of the stuff was, stuff we know already. We've heard before, it's been discussed, but like, they also managed to get some interesting stuff out of it, some interesting new information.
Yeah. So on that note, though, I think it was really cool that they pointed out, and even, I think Joppa mentioned, or they talked about it with Joppa, was like, it's okay to repeat things every once in a while. Like, it's okay. Yeah. And you know what? Like, speaking of veterans, right? Deal with it. Like, there are new people coming into the community and we should be super glad that, they're not digging around as in depth as some of us are. And, or
everybody's got a
so
different starting point,
So
everybody's got a different starting point. So you need to keep that in mind. And that's something that I've sort of learned over the last couple of years in terms of doing like shows and doing content, is you do have to keep the basics at the forefront. Sometimes.
But I mean, this interview was totally like a mix of everything. So like, it really covers all the bases. Anyway.
Yeah, so let's get into the first one. One of the topics that emerged throughout the interview was something that VR seems to have, and I don't want to say like change their stance on here, but almost more like an acknowledgement that there's a need for it in some way. And what Joppa said in the quote was, limited instancing. Ooh. Now, before everyone freaks out, hold on, calm down, everyone. Pantheon is not becoming an instanced MMO. It is still, the open world is still in the tenets, and very important. But they did get into specifics about what Joppa was talking about here.
Yeah,
so let's make sure let's make sure we clarify it, because it's a hot button issue. So the first time it came up was when they were talking about what the server situation is going to be. Joppa said they want to target like 3,000 to 5,000 people on a server, but they haven't really made a final decision. That's going to be done later. Yeah. I think it was more about like, they just don't want to have too many servers. So what they might do is have, and he said this, several instances of the starting zones for the first week or two until the population spread out. So the goal is to keep the servers together and not spin up all these servers that end up killing both the new and the old servers as a result. So what he's basically saying is like a temporary solution to, have some starting zones, starting areas phased or instanced, to sort of help address that,
phasing, right? Or overflow. There's a few like words for it. And I'm glad he even put like a time limit on it, like a few weeks post launch, and they talked about this pretty extensively about, it's just how it happens. Like launch, there's a boom, and then inevitably, like no matter how good your game is, like there's a serious fall off, like 50% or more. Like it gets crazy, especially because people are playing for longer durations, right? To start. And then they, get their job. They go back to their job because they took time off to, play the first few days. But like, it's just inevitable, right? And dealing with that problem is going to require some kind of, I don't want to say compromise, but I do honestly think this is a great way to kind of address the issues that come with launch day. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm going to probably have to reiterate this 1,000 times, but I'm not a fan of instancing. Like, I've said that so many times.
Nor am I.
I don't think anyone in this community, well, I shouldn't say anyone, but a majority of this community is like, no instance,
Right.
But if I had to choose between a few weeks of, like, he also said the starting areas, not every zone, but specifically the starting areas, being phased or having overflow versus that inevitable ghost town that a server becomes, a month after launch, and not to mention, like, that happens, and then you have to go through the drama of like server merges. And anyway, like, if I had a choice between that and the phasing for, a set duration, I'd rather take that. So
I think most reasonable people would. I like that they brought up the New World. I knew as soon as they started talking about this, I'm like, Sakari's going to bring up New World because they were a big part of that. And
funny enough, it was Mox that brought it up first.
Oh, was it?
Obviously they were both involved, right? And Sakari ran the company and everything, but Mox brought it up at first, and I love how people are just casually talking about New World now instead of like,
it's not a meme anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, but sorry.
No, it's interesting. So I think this is exactly the problem that New World experienced. If you don't know what happened there, I mean, it was kind of that they spun up all these new servers and then guilds got separated and it just was chaotic, right? So there's a solution, and I'm glad that Jop is, understanding that the nuanced response is sometimes necessary, and it's not everything's black and white. So, moving on, and again on the same theme of instancing, he talked about dungeons, and they were discussing design and stuff like that. He said it was incorrect to say Pantheon will have no instancing, and that's something that I'm sure caught a lot of listeners' ears, because he was speaking specifically to boss encounters, like boss
very
rooms,
specific situations,
very specifically. And this is like, when this conversation comes up about instancing, this is always sort of where I think we end up landing, is like, nobody likes instancing, but we realize that we don't want to have those big moments ruined. This is something that I've heard other people say. Minus used to be big on this point as well when we when he was here, and he would say, like, how could you want to have worked so hard to get to this big moment in your epic quest or at the end of the dungeon, and just to have somebody come in and ruin it? And I kind of pushed back on that. I used to always be like, you know what? I feel like that's part of the deal. And, so I've listened, and I've tried to absorb new information over the years and stuff. And I'm kind of okay with where this is at now and how they talked about this. So I think there's some good logic going on here.
Yeah.
Some people won't like it. But I think that there's a reason for it. And I hope that it's following into the same category as before, where, Joppa's realizing a nuanced approach, sometimes the way to go. And then it came up again when they were discussing guilds and how to prevent massive guilds from monopolizing content. So similar idea. He said limited instancing is one thing they are considering. So it's something that I think they've sort of realized. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, yeah, because I think one of the examples, or one of the, I would say, loosely problems, because as you said, like, some of this is like part of the game, and like I'm probably gonna bring this up a bunch, but like, he didn't say every boss, he didn't say every, it was a specific solution to a specific problem. And one of the problems would be, a super guild basically always having camps on, the main bosses that, everyone needs or something, which, may or may not happen, right. But like, that is what this is directed at. And again, they're very clear that the dungeons themselves are not instanced. Like, right. We're talking like a boss room, or like, And to kind of further elaborate, I'm kind of getting all over the place, but like this came up multiple times too, is like, you're still going to have, like, to get access to the boss room, you're still going to have to extensively do the open world dungeon. You have to find keys, you have to find, put things together, you have to do a task, or like all this stuff that it's not going to put you in some bubble, like
Right.
the only thing comes at that pivotal moment that you've worked hours to get to, just so that when you're contending with the content, you're just contending with the content.
Yeah.
Because of that lead up.
Yeah, and that's sort of where my journey has taken me in terms of thinking about this problem, is that the social aspect of MMOs that I like is everything except that stuff. It's like, I like all the social, ins and outs. And if I'm being really honest, I don't, that griefing and that kind of behavior, or that kind of, unfair play style that just prevents people from getting to do something they really want to do in those moments is really just not that great. I mean, it's just easier sometimes to be all or nothing on something. And I think it's, when you're being really honest with yourself, it's those little pieces that make all the difference, right? So
yeah, and I'm kind of with you on that. Like, I don't want there to be, I don't want it to be insulated, right? Like,
yeah,
and I don't think they do either. Like, it was very clear, like these are specific solutions to specific problems, and they're not going outside of that kind of boundary of the only the specific use cases where the instancing is basically the best solution. And I it's almost better to say like what they didn't we know what they didn't say. Like, it doesn't mean that every boss is going to be instance either. It doesn't mean that, like, a zones, for example, as we talked about earlier, they're not going to overflow all the time. He put a limit on it, right? Like, it doesn't mean you won't ever see other players. Like, that is certainly so far from what they're doing. Because everything in this, this whole interview, like, the premise was like basically social stuff, keeping people together. And so it would be antithetical to that, to do anything other than what's specifically necessary to make the game work, and keep people.
That's exactly
together.
right.
So
yeah, that's exactly right.
But yeah,
Absolutely
I mean, again, I'm someone that I hate instancing in general, and it would take a lot of argument to convince me that it was ever a good thing, and that's why I'm glad they got into the nitty gritty here and really targeted this. I can't even argue with it. Like, this is the case where it seems to be the best solution, and I want to see how it plays out. I still want to get griefed every once in a while. I know that's a weird thing to say, but like, I think it's still going to be very possible. And I'm sure there will be contested bosses. Like, I'm sure there'll be contested raids. I'm sure, like, all this stuff is still going to be a thing, but they're just not all the time,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, just look at what happened on the weekend, right? With the train. I mean, that would never happen in an instance enviment, right? Like, and it was,
that's still going to happen.
funny.
They're not canceling that out. They're not canceling Rob. But
they're not canceling Rob. We might be canceling Rob, but they're not.
You better bet though, like, if they kind of push the line on this, like, I'm going to be saying something about it.
See, and that's where I have to go there too. Like, I'm not a fan of the slippery slope argument, but it is a tendency to want to go there. And it's like, if you allow this, then they allow that, and then that allows this, and it goes down. And that's, it's not a great way to think about things, because it takes away any sort of allowance for any gray area or anything like that.
Right. You can't criticize for something that's not happened yet. Like,
yeah, you also want to keep your guard up though, right? Because you don't want to be like, oh, whatever, they can just do that, it's fine, no problem. And then it's like, next thing you know. So
I'm just saying that now so people can hold me to it if they do, which I'd see. That's the thing, is I don't think they will kind of push that boundary into it. Just wouldn't make sense for 9 years of working on this, like, and then they
to go full instancing.
Exactly. Like, it's just not going to happen. But anyway, so that was probably the most controversial. Probably the the most controversial
Probably.
thing.
I don't know. I heard that you might have some ranting still coming up. We'll see.
Maybe.
Maybe. The next point that I want to talk about is somewhat of an expansion on a design that we already knew about. We knew that they wanted to employ this, and that's being like safe spots in dungeons where people can safely log out. VR has maintained that they do want players to be able to feel like they've accomplished something in a 2-hour play window, and this has been one of the ways that they've sort of targeted that goal. If you think of that campfire in Amber Faith they showed a while back, and there's been a couple other times too, you get the idea of what we're talking about here. It's those little safe resting areas that they highlighted. So I'm glad they got some information about that.
Yeah, I actually want to like shout out kind of Sakari and Joppa. I mean, for kind of pushing this and then coming back to it after the conversation kind of meandered on. Because when I was going through this the first time, I was like, oh, dang, like he didn't really answer the question. Just with
I had the same thought. Yeah.
And then, Sakari like kind of went there a little bit more, but then eventually Joppa just kind of like, he was like, oh, I want to go back to that and answer that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you. And then he really elaborated, like there's some good stuff in here. So let's get into that.
Yeah. So some of the stuff that they talked about on this front was, so what exactly, mechanics will be in play in these safe spots? Like what are building these safe zones and what does it mean to be protected? That was the word.
Yeah.
And basically he said protected means there's no risk to the player of like trains, but also they want to make sure it's unable to be used as an exploit by other people.
Yeah, of course.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Right? And it seemed pretty obvious to me that the mechanics behind this weren't really fleshed out yet, like the whole protection.
How do you do
side,
that?
We'll see how they go about it. My hope is that, like personally, and this wasn't said in the interview, and this is a bit of a vendetta of my own lately, but instead of like adding some kind of protective bubble, I really hope that they just kind of make it so that, maybe you shouldn't be able to train someone that's completely AFK. Just throwing that out there.
I don't know about that.
Okay.
Like, if somebody's AFK out in the world and they're just sitting there, it's not my fault if I run by them with a train of mobs. I mean, I to me, protective bubble is how I'm envisioning it, how I'm seeing this for sure. Like it's just like some sort of code that goes around this spot that says mobs can't go in here, and if you are engaged with a mob in combat, you are also not able to enter this area.
Okay. I got you. Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. Well, I guess maybe I just wanted to slip that in there.
Desmond just hates AFK people. Apparently, we just learned something today.
No,
Don't go AFK around Desmond.
I just mean like I have some qualms with how trains work in MMOs, and I know a lot of people disagree with me on the functionality of it, but maybe it just comes from playing a lot of different games where trains were prevalent, and it's just the mechanics of it. Anyway, we can move on to things that were actually talked about.
Okay, then let's do that. Yeah, the next part that they talked about was that there may be a way to have like a meeting stone at the entrance to a dungeon that lets you summon people to those safe spots. So basically what they said is that if the person has unlocked the safe spot in the dungeon, and then they've also attuned themselves to like the meeting stone outside the dungeon, they would be able to bring people to them in the safe spot. So I think that's, again, it's an elaboration or an iteration upon something they've talked about before, but we're finally sort of like hearing that that's in the plans now, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, I like that they elaborated on this because it's actually something that I've been hoping to hear about some more. And,
yeah. They said that you might need a regent. You might need the goal basically is they don't want to trivialize dungeon traversal, but they also want to give players a method to form up and maintain groups, which makes perfect sense. This is how it is, right? And this is what they want to do in Pantheon. So, any other thoughts on those two those items?
Well, I'm surprised this hasn't come up yet because like I immediately think of Sites of Grace.
Oh, you're going with the Elden Ring.
I'm giving you that. I'm throwing the bone to you, Theric. Like,
nice.
Doesn't that make you think of like Sites of Grace and whatever they're called in Dark Souls?
Bonfires.
That's what I think of. Because you have to unlock them to get back to them. Although in this case, Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a pretty good compromise in order to kind of get the best of both worlds. On one hand, there wouldn't ever be a way to skip content that you haven't already overcome. That's a huge one for me. Like that is a pivotal thing. If that's not present, I don't like it. So, we won't be like teleporting newbies into the heart of a dungeon. That's just, that's not at all what this is.
No call of hero.
No call of the hero. Thank goodness. But also it makes it more likely that, should you get into one of the deep safe spots of a dungeon, let's say, because these dungeons, they're huge. Like I'm expecting for like the major dungeons, like there's going to be several of these safe spots. And if you're deep into a dungeon, it's more likely that if something happens, someone has to go, and they bring this up, like that you'd be able to fill that slot without having to restart the whole freaking thing just to get someone in, right? Because again, the goal is a 2-3 hour play window, and that doesn't mean you do the whole dungeon in 2 or 3 hours, right? Like, these safe spots kind of reinforce that, is like that you could go about this in like multiple nights even. So it's as long as they've reached the point. So, if they haven't, maybe your group does go to maybe the last save point, or, worst case scenario to the beginning of the dungeon, if they've never done the dungeon before, right?
Right.
It just increases the likelihood that you're not just screwed.
which is a good thing, decrease likelihood that you are absolutely screwed. That is what we want. Yeah.
And so as long as you have to do the content at least once to utilize these, I think that's great, and it does. This was a kind of a rocky thing. So I'm pretty sure I'm interpreting this right, but maybe not. You got to watch it yourself, guys. But it sounds like it'll require you to be summoned. So like, I don't think this is just like a teleport to safe spots. So it's not a site of grace in that sense.
No, that's what I was just going to say. It's like, that's why it's not a site of grace for me, because you're not popping up and open your map and just hitting a button to go here, right? Like you actually have to go, the stone and the safe spot have to work in tandem, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, so that's what it sounds like.
You've got to be at the stone, and I don't know, but it sounds like there's like a sort of a one-to-one connection between the two things, and if you don't have both of them, you're not able to be teleported. Yeah,
and I mean, as much as I'd like to know like the specifics on how this all works, and they got pretty good. I think I have a good idea of it, but like I really want to see how this works in game, and but it would make sense that the only way to get in would be to be summoned, right? Like you wouldn't be able to do that on your own. That way, you can't just immediately get into the dungeon on your own. Even if you've done it before, I don't think you should just be able to solo get all the way to the end of the dungeon, even if, personally. But the idea of summoning someone, I think is just a really nice best of both worlds.
I agree. I think maybe you throw in a little extra requirement of maybe certain classes, like what if summoners are the dungeon summoners, so to speak. I don't know. Maybe you could make it a little more onerous by making it maybe like half the classes can do it and half can't. I don't know. Something like that.
I would like it to be an item if we're talking about like what we would prefer. Just because, I definitely think certain classes should have their own things that they do well. And maybe even unique things, but a kind of fundamental thing like getting a player to where you are, if you lose someone in a group, I don't, that maybe not as class specific, but like an item that's reasonably expensive, like, especially because, if you have it in your bag and, your remnants gets misplaced, you'd have to figure that out. It'd be a little more creative.
I think it would help build an economy, that's for sure. Like get a really desired item like that.
Heck yeah! Like anyway, there's a lot of places they could go with this. I like the outline that they shared, though.
Sure,
it makes me happy because this is totally something that happens constantly.
It is absolutely, and it's very defeating when you just have to start all over again. So there's a related topic that Joppa commented on and how they are now looking at some ideas surrounding, and I thought it was interesting how he framed this, but basically he's talking about unlocking convenience as a means of progression. And he sort of reminded us of the taming, Parting the Veil, where they talked about creature taming, because I didn't really understand it until he brought that up, but making convenience part of your character's progression without taking away from the sense of adventure, I think is an interesting idea. I don't know if I support it 100%. And I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest with you. It's a little bit tricky because I think so basically they said time investment will be required for players from different starting areas to meet up. And like, this is the example that they're sort of getting at. They said it's a careful balance. Travel can introduce these, and I like this quote, massive unnecessary obtuseness, which is true. A lot of games do have this, problem. But the idea for a means of fast travel from major hubs is that's what Joppa said. It's something that they want to consider. So where are we going? Where are we going with this? Right?
Okay. I'm going to have to go back and re-listen to that. But in my notes, he more teased that, he had a specific example in mind about
the WoW.
The WoW train
example.
That would be more involved than hub travel, I think. But it's a touchy thing. Like that quote that you have here, or the kind of phrase, that was unlocking convenience as a means of progression sounds really scary.
It does sound scary, yeah.
But it is present in pretty much every game. Obviously, we this was even brought up in the interview, was you get higher level, or you get better climbing skill. You get, all these things technically make traversal quote unquote easier. They also have the side effect of unlocking things you literally couldn't do before, but generally quote unquote easier. So it's that's kind of an obvious thing to me.
Easier, but not convenience to me implies skipping stuff, skipping content, making it effortless to do something, as opposed to getting better at climbing. That's a different thing to me.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that was really elaborated enough to draw that conclusion, personally.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
To me, it sounds like he's pretty against skipping, honestly.
Right. He's the phrase careful balance. I mean, obviously mindful of it. But you think about all the games you play, think about single player games, right? And then it is a lot of what your character progression is just things, the world gets a little smoother as you play, right? You don't have so many jagged edges anymore that you can cut yourself on or frustrate you. You end up just doing the higher level stuff becomes what you can focus on without having to worry about the little things anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Part of the progression is that you don't have to do the same thing that you had to do before with the same amount of effort. Right. And I love survival games for this, because I think they're a great example of a kind of progression, because usually you end up being able to make machines that will do something for you with a lot less input. Yeah. That is kind of, I think, the general philosophy. I don't think these particular items are going to trivialize anything. I don't think it's going to become teleports, is I guess what I'm coming, I don't think it was supposed to be fast travel at level 1. I don't know everything about WoW, but I do know the train he's talking about, and it still takes you from one place to another. Without, is it teleport? I thought it was actually, I don't even know. I thought you just ride the train. Maybe it does zone you at some point, actually. I think it leaves and it zones you at some point. But so what it sounds like, this might be where I get a little crazy, but what it sounds like is, if you wanted to literally group up with your friend at level 1, let's say, servers start up, everyone's going crazy, and you're like, oh man, my racial bonuses are so good on this, and so I'm going to roll a ogre warrior or dire lord, ogre dire lord, but I want to play with my friend who is an elf ranger, level 1, because there's a lot of people that is in their heads. Like that's what they want. And like, I think the idea is that you may be able to kind of adventure your way into some safer transit to get between some places. So that it's not like, you know, you're not literally running through level 50 stuff, to give an example. Like that was kind of the gist that I got. Oh, interestingly enough, like, did you catch this? So when he was talking about the hub thing, he said capital cities. And he listed them off like really quick, like Broken Maw, Kadasa, and Thronefast. Like, I don't know, it may have just been an example, but that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I caught that. Absolutely. And then to me, that just speaks to like having that one hub, you know, on the different continents, because those will all be, one be on Rainfall, one would be on King's Reach, and one would be on what's the frozen
White
one?
Thaw.
White Thaw. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I get it. It's just that, what's the difference between hopping on a train that you got to sit on for 5 minutes to get to the next hub city, or just popping in a teleport?
Well, I think the point is that you still have to like get to the place. Like you still have to get to the train, there's no, so to speak.
But if it's in the city, is it really that dangerous to get to? Like,
oh, you're saying like as if you started out literally at the hub.
Yes.
See, I think the idea, and again, this is all interpretation, but I think the idea was that you had to adventure. Like he said, there's still a time commitment. Like you still have to do something to, but it just sounds like it might not be literally the entire, you know, Kinos Freeport kind of thing. I don't know. Like I think Joppa kind of recognizes that players sometimes like want to immediately start grouping with their friends from the start, but also recognizes that, you know, making an easy path for that kind of takes away, like, I would say a huge value when it comes to that. And he kind of lists this, you know, it's like a sense of place, or the reveals that he's, you know, really wants reveals, like, or the novelty of seeing something out of place. Like I love, he mentioned that first time that he saw a troll in EQ, like far away from
like, what is this?
Exactly.
Who is this player?
Like,
what are they doing?
That like kind of sense of like, this is not supposed to be like this. Like in EQ2, like the first time I saw an ogre in Kinos, because they put in the work to do the you know, the betrayal quest, which at the time was a lot. Like that actually makes special situations, but if you make it easy, it doesn't matter. Like it takes away from player identity, which is something he was huge on. I'm sure a lot of the same folks that want instant travel to their friends would also, and again, and I don't want to speak for people, but in the conversations I've had about this, what people seem to want is that they would be able to get to their friend either instantly or just like very quickly, and be able to do all the same things with their friend. So, you know, same tasks, have the same faction, you know, all that when they get to their friends, so they can basically just like play along and do all the same stuff. But dude, this is a world. Like
that's exactly right. That I was going to say is like the world comes first, like world before your immediate needs.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I don't know. I'm really passionate about this, because like you can't expect the NPCs in Fairthale to react to, you know, even like, let's say a more neutral faction, like a gnome, the same as an elf from Fairthale. Like if you made that journey, whether it's instant or not, and like you're going to run into these kind of instances where, oh, well, they gave this person a task, but they don't trust me yet. And people will complain about that. Because we're so used to, you know, oh, you share the quest, and, you know, like this kind of, I don't know, it's just super lame to me nowadays. Like and maybe this is just me. I'm soapboxing here, but like, I don't think the game should ever be watered down to accommodate that kind of desire. Like I'm not against people playing together, obviously, but I think people need to learn to be okay with the game being a bit different for them than their friends, and just playing together anyway. Like, you know,
I agree, man. I think you're totally right on this, and I feel like it just there's so much pressure, I think, on developers when they're designing games these days to always put your players first, right? You should never put an inconvenience in the name of your world, right? Like it just doesn't play very well today. But I think this is a situation where, that we need to go, they need to go against that a little bit. And I understand it's a difficult thing when players come in and they're like, well, my wife plays this or my husband plays this and I want to play with them and we want to be in the same area. But
they're so tied to their racials, that like, that's I think one of the key things is like, people just don't want to be
forced to change their
exactly. That's what kind of kills me is like I know people play MMOs for different reasons. Not everyone's a role player or whatever. Like people want to min max, and I get that. But like, if you want to do that, like put in the work, like or like I get
put in the work.
And even saying that, I'm sure just is going to upset people. But like, if you want to play it from friends right from the start, but it's like, if that's more important to you than having a unique experience, like just roll
the problem
roll the
is
same
people,
race. Like,
yeah, people don't see the big picture like that, right? They just they face one barrier and they're like, well, I'll just go play something else. It's like, well, that's kind of where we always end up, right?
I'm sorry. Ask me to help you. I'll or find someone to do that adventure with you and make it a part of the game. And
do a naked gnome run, man. I'm telling you, it's fun. It's the way to do it. This is how you conquer this problem. Naked gnome runs for all my friends. Yeah. We will do this. Pantheon Plus will commit to escorting you and your whoever from one place to another to help facilitate this.
I don't know if
overcome this problem.
Something tells me if we started a Pantheon Plus escort service, that might not be cool.
That doesn't sound so great. Now that you say it that way, that doesn't sound that great. Although potential, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll
anyway,
see.
Sorry, our audience for getting so hot-headed, but like if you have like good reasons or good ways to make this work without watering down the game, please like throw them down there, tell them to the developers, because I know this is a hard thing. Obviously, people want to play together, but I'm just not willing to concede, the uniqueness of the world. So.
I agree. It's a good transition actually to the next part that I wanted to mention. That's on the social side of things. Joppa had a lot to say. He really wanted to talk about this. First up was the often referenced but rarely detailed matchmaking tools that Pantheon's going to offer for players. P-Harmony, it's got to be said, right? And they've said it over and over again. They want to have a system that modernizes finding groups without the removal of the social aspect. So no auto group finder, no nothing like that. And we got a few ideas, but still, again, nothing concrete, really, when it comes to the matchmaking tools. Joppa said they have the system designed to be rolled out, which is interesting. It basically allows players to drill deep into who they are and what they can offer. So like really detailed search criteria and what you can show to people. Like it's going to be a representation of who you are. Your player identity is going to be something you can show off in the way that they want to do it. Basically, he said it's a place where you can craft your persona. So for example, like people will be able to see, as we talked about earlier, maybe what meeting stones you've attuned to or what safe spots you've unlocked, that kind of stuff. I thought that was a really good question, like how deep are we going to go on this, right? Like people be able to see, my mastery points and my
that was
build.
The first question was like, oh man, are they going to be able to see my build? And Joppa, got right on that to say like, you
can opt into it basically, I think is what he said.
Yeah, because he straight up said like, I don't want people to be able to see if someone's running a unoptimal setup. Which I totally agree with. I think that's one thing that if you get into a group with someone that is, maybe they tried for something that just isn't meta or whatever, because that's going to happen. I think everyone knows there's going to be a guided way to do things, but like play with them first. you know,
Right,
see how it rolls before you make your judgment. So I think he knows that if that's given to people before the social side, it'll actually avoid the social side. So I'm really glad
I agree.
kind of nabbed that one.
I really like this idea. This is something that I've sort of envisioned when I've said it a million times, that they need to evolve the tools we have at our disposal to play socially. This is exactly what I'm talking about. And something like where you can customize your character's profile so granularly that people will want, like, people are going to look for certain things. Like, I really like this idea, and I would spend so much time like crafting my player profile so people can find what they're looking for, and I can advertise what I'm good at and what I can offer to the group. I think is really, really fun. And this is now, again, they said this is the foundation they have in mind. What works will remain to be seen, as you would expect. Player testing and game testing is going to factor into this. But, you know, again, he did say that they've got this system sort of basically designed and you know, at some point to be rolled out. That's going to be an exciting day when they finally show this off.
I mean, it's probably, I doubt it's going to be like complete, but just, you know, to see where they're going with it. Yeah, we'll be great.
Yeah.
Because until we see the UI
basics
itself, like, we're not going to really know, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they did say a little later on, you know, one of the sort of critiques was about Ko's stream was, you know, that the UI is basically undeveloped or underdeveloped. That was something that reason for why Ko didn't put his skills on his bar. So a little bit of a tangent there, but a good point nonetheless. They went on to talk about guilds. As I said earlier, they want to have a guild database available for query, sort of like what we just said, similar to the player query, the player finder. It will be an in-game feature. They did say they have no planned cap size for guilds.
Well, okay.
Which, we'll probably...
So I actually wrote that down too, but then later he does say that they do plan to have a cap, but they just don't have a plan on like what the cap will be yet. Like it's one of those things that they're kind of like, you know, we don't have any numbers until we have people start making guilds in, you know, alpha, beta, et cetera, and kind of see what works. Because he was clear that he doesn't want to have just fully uncapped guilds, but to find a balance between where it's like, you know, you can't just have a super guild on the server, right?
Yeah, Pantheon plus Mega Guild.
Right.
So yeah, no, that's that. Moving on, they talked a little bit about the zones and maps came up. So they said even with the seamless zoning that we've talked about a lot on the show here, they said chat still remains, you know, chat still has zones. So if you're talking in Thronefast, there is still like Thronefast zone chat. It doesn't go global automatically just because there's no zone lines anymore.
Right.
I thought that was an important distinction because it's not something you might, there's actually a lot of things that are dependent on zones, you know, from a technical standpoint, I think is the point he was making. Players finding groups, it goes into the maps, which
like
is something
zones
else
still exist. Like they have to technically exist for a lot of reasons. Like it totally makes sense. It's just, I feel like they always just have to be like really clear that it's like, they're technical zones, but you know, you're not going to feel it when except for with things like you're chatting into a certain region. I mean, it's just like, wow, like, you know, or any open world game, you have like zone chat.
Right.
Anyway.
And then when you think about maps, because they clarified, again, mini maps are not a part of Pantheon. But overland and top-down maps are something that's planned. Joppa said there's Fog of War. It's a Fog of War driven map. It'll have limited landmarks with maybe a depiction, is what he said, about where things are. Basically giving the idea for players to allow players to unlock the map's effectiveness. And I liked how he sort of described this. He actually said, because you think about that, you automatically just think, oh, well, I go here, it unlocks the Fog of War from that area. But he actually talked about things like reputation, right? And faction being a way of unlocking a map. That is a cool idea, and that's not something I'd thought about before. So I was pretty intrigued by that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad that this came up again, honestly, because this is something I feel like every week, you know, this comes up, and it does. It seems like every time it does come up, we do get like one tiny new detail.
It's like death by 1,000 cuts or life by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, as it kind of gets, you know, I don't know, more developed, or at least like they reveal more things. And a lot of people in our community still think that Pantheon won't have a map at all. even though
Yeah,
it has
yeah,
been
that's
talked
true.
about just several times now. But I do love what he's talking about. Not only will there be maps that do kind of that regional fog of war thing, but I love that, like, the idea that you'll be able to get more detailed maps through reputation and faction and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But again, nothing about a player location. Like, no player location,
Right.
no, you are here, so don't freak out. And sure, I
Mhm.
like the thing about the maps that always kind of comes up is, like, I'm sure someone will just screenshot all of the defogged highest
Of
quality
course.
maps, and put them online. But, like, at least this ties it into some gameplay, and having the resources in game, I think, does mean something, or at least it does to me.
Sure
Not
it
having to
does.
have a map up on my second monitor and or
Yeah.
tabbed out or whatever. So it's like, as long as we don't have, like, the player location, because that's what ties into all the like overlays. You'll have, like, EQ2 maps, or
Mhm.
all the other games that they'll find a way. They'll find a
Yeah.
way, especially because overlays are very common now. Like Overwolf, the platform for overlays, like, you could do anything
Mhm.
with that.
Yep.
And it'll scale your resolution. It's crazy. So,
Mhm.
but as long as you don't have the player location itself, it works, and it gives a reason to do it in game. And I mean, I like where they're going with this. I actually can't wait to see this. It really sounds like, because I like the Embers map system. Um,
Yes. Yes. Me too.
yeah, I figured, but it's, like, expanded,
Yeah.
right? Because one thing about the Embers map system that kind of stinks is, like, you just have the huge zone map, and
Mhm.
like, there are places that are obviously more. I don't know. What did Joppa say? He said, like, a depiction, right? Depiction of an
Mhm.
area, and that's kind of part of their in Embers. I think it's kind of part of what they're going for. It's like, it's not exact, like, it's not perfect, and I don't think
Yes.
it should be. But having a depiction, to me, what this sounds like is that we might get even more detailed regions within regions. So, like, this part of Throne Fast, we might get to see a little bit
Yeah.
more detailed version if we go through that process, which just sounds so fun and would be so
It does.
satisfying.
You're 100% satisfying. Like, what if I need to get my faction up to a certain level, and once I get to that level, then I can see, where the guards are on the map, right? Like, then I
Oh,
can
that's
see,
something. That's interesting.
right, right. I know. It opens up all these cool things, and like you say, even if you can see the best, most 100% map somewhere else online and have it up on your second monitor, that doesn't mean the same thing as I can pull it up in game myself. I don't need to bother with that
Maybe
stuff.
different maps from different factions too. So what you said just made me think,
Yeah.
like, because obviously we have factions in Pantheon, and you won't be able to, like, if you're like a Scar Dire Lord or something, like, you're not gonna just waltz into Fairthale, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I would expect, like, maybe there's a certain
Yeah.
group outside of Fairthale that gives you a certain map that shows you, like, at least a general idea of a better way to get into the city as your faction, which would be different than getting a map from the
Yeah.
people of Fairthale. Like, it opens up a lot of really interesting possibilities, having different variations of maps, and hearing
Yeah.
that as being on the table is just so exciting. Oh man.
Yeah. All I know is I will no longer feel useless when I hit the M key on the keyboard and nothing happens.
It's just like, this is something that happens, like, every time that we play. I always, like, bring up like, whenever I hit M for the first time. Like, sometimes
Yeah.
it's like several hours in, and then, like, in our last time, I was in for like 3 minutes, and I'm like, oh, hit the M key.
Hit
Dang
the
it.
M key. I think it was about 5 minutes for me. Yeah. Doesn't take long. Doesn't take long. Conditioning is a thing. Okay, so the next part, let's not too much here, but I did want to mention it just regarding leveling. That was something that was brought up, and the early game experience that again, when Co was playing. So Joppa basically said, things are a little overtuned at the moment. The UI, as I said, is undeveloped or underdeveloped, and basically they wanted people to sort of hit that level 4 to 5 range before they started taking on some of the more challenging stuff. It was a little confusing. I don't really know exactly, where he was going with it. Did you really get a sense of what he was talking about?
First of all, I thought it was a bit bold of Mox to kind of just start bringing up pre-alpha stuff.
Yeah.
But hey, Joppa didn't bat an eye. He just like went with it, right? Because it was like kind of criticism, right? And Joppa was like, yeah, he talked about UI UX, right, which you brought up, and I always appreciate when they reiterate like, yes, the UI that we have, yes, the starting experience, user experience, all that. It's like it's got a long way to go, but it does sound like the first few levels, or at least their goals long term, are that it's supposed to be kind of more introductory, a bit faster even. It sounds like, which makes sense for a new character. Like you have, and most games have this, where, your first several levels, you're just kind of like learning and all that. Not that it has to be a tutorial before anyone gets crazy, but like, I think level 5 is a great starting point. Because the indication was like, hey, the Goblin Cave, it kind of starts level 5. And that's kind of like the first group thing that you're expected to do. Or at least like he gave that as an example, but yeah, level 5 as being the target for, this is when you're going to have like a lot of opportunities to start grouping up. And then the levels before that are kind of like, getting you into the rhythm, the kind of starting experience and stuff. But I gotta say, level 5 is way better than, what do most games do? Like 10, 12, or 20 sometimes. Like most of the year, like soloing up to level 20. Like, no. I don't think that's their goal. But
and then a little pop-up window comes up in the game and says, "Congratulations on completing your early journey." And you're like, "What? What? I'm level 30. What the heck?"
Yeah. But no, that's good news to me.
It is. And it's funny, one of the most interesting pieces of this whole interview came at the very end, just like as they were wrapping up the interview. They're like, all right, thank you, Joppa. He's like, oh yeah, and one more thing. I just want to ask about the music, because they were complimenting him on making the music. Joppa used to be the composer. Joppa said he's not composing music for Pantheon anymore, but he threw in that not only they don't have somebody currently doing it, but he said, quote, they're on the verge of making a big move with their audio engine and partnering with a team that does AAA work. So
boom.
What the heck? What the heck? What's going on? I want to know about this. I love music in MMOs. I've said that every time we stream, every time we talk music, I'm like, it's such a big deal for me, and I know it's not for everybody, but this is hugely interesting to me, and I want to know what's going on.
Dude, me too. I mean, I'm in the same boat as you. I really can't wait to hear more about this. It sounds like it's a little early right now, but they have some stuff in mind, and I mean, of course I'm sad that someone else is going to be in charge of music and sound. But
as long as his music doesn't go away, and that was not what. They didn't say that they're like replacing any of his music. It's still going to be
kind of joked that like, he'll find a way to get his stuff in. Right. Like, but I trust his judgment. Right. And I'm sure he at this point, he's got plenty of connections. And so I'm mainly just excited that the whole like sound engine is going to improve, because like, I've had some words about that. And the sound effects, and it's a mess right now. It's a mess.
I don't feel like it's a mess. I know you feel that way. I don't feel like it's a mess, but it's. I understand where you're coming from.
It is not to my standards, or even close to my standards. But hearing this basically tells me like the reason it hasn't really seen any work is because they're planning on probably revamping the whole thing with a team of specialists, which I think is actually kind of an important note here. You kind of just threw that out there, but it sounds like they're just going to contract a team to help them, which in their case, being a kickstarted, or crowdfunded, mostly crowdfunded MMO, it's like, it makes sense or like financial sense to contract someone that is just going to get it done as efficiently as possible. And I can't wait to hear more about it.
Yeah, no, totally. And like, it's kind of interesting that, again, we're always speculating, like, where are they in development? Where exactly, how far along are they? How close are we to alpha, beta launch? To me, this kind of a move implies a further along than maybe I thought they were.
Maybe, I don't know. I think it's more just like, they've made plans, like they, and it,
That sounds like there's more than plans. They've got like, they're on the verge of making a big move and partnering with the team like that.
I don't know.
Seems like a little more imminent.
There's some Joppa words in there, like maybe I'm just a little.
He did say, yeah, he didn't say imminent.
He didn't say imminent, but on the verge. I'm kind of like, all right, Joppa, on the verge. Okay, sure we are.
Soon.
Okay. Anyway, but we'll see how that plays out. It's really exciting. I mean, there was a ton of other stuff in the interview. A lot of stuff with like GMs and guides and moderation and some kind of just general Pantheon goodness. There were a lot of like little funny moments too, like when Sakari kind of made up an example about, he's asking a question about the guides, but the guides, he's like, oh, what if the guide took on the form of like the King of Thronefast, and Joppa was just like, he quickly just like, the Queen, you mean?
Immediately corrected him. I love that. I caught that too. As soon as he said it, I was like, you mean the Queen, right? It's not. There's no king right now.
Yeah, that was a nice little nugget. There's a ton of fun stuff like that. Really super worth watching or listening to. I mean, it's an interview. Like, you don't have to watch. But highly recommend. They did a great job. I applaud them.
They really did.
It was a wonderful interview. Lots of info. And it's cool that Joppa did it. I'm stoked.
Absolutely.
And I can't believe we talked about this a lot.
I know. We went for almost an hour just talking about this. It was great, though. I mean, good content is good content. It creates conversations, and that's what this did. So that is the VR news for the week. Let's quickly look at the notes in terms of what we're doing here at Pantheon Plus for the week of March 6th through the 12th. We have a busy week, of course, some Mondays. Midnight, Drac and his After Dark crew are still streaming some Dark Age Camelot. That's midnight Eastern on our Twitch channel. And March Madness went into full swing as of a couple days ago.
Oh, there's already so much drama.
There is drama. There is definitely drama. If you're not in our Discord, you need to jump in there and find out what's going on, because MMO March Madness, here's how it stands right now. The current winners of their brackets are the Ogre Warrior, boo, because I voted for the Dwarf Warrior.
Me too.
Lost. Yeah, we both lost. However, the Archai Monk, yay! They won over the Human Monk, right? You were down for the Archai
absolutely.
Monk too, right?
Easy vote.
Yeah, easy vote. Today, as of recording, voting is between the Elf Druid and the Halfling Druid. So I didn't look, Desrin, and I didn't maybe ask you, but where are you going?
Dude, this is actually the tough one. This is the first tough one because
it is tough. I had to think about this.
They're both so like quintessential druids, honestly. Like, I don't know, like Drax's just so mean for putting these two like
that's
right
what makes it awesome.
I voted Elf Druid, just so I can influence our audience. No, I'm just kidding. But I went Elf Druid. The halflings are so good in Pantheon. But as far as just like, I mean, it's that's what I was. I was Elf Druid. Most of my characters have been Elf Druid, so it's like, I had to vote that.
Ooh, I went with the Halfling Druid myself because I felt like there was more of a connection with the wards, with Herode, right? I felt like there was too much synchronicity, too much synergy between the druid class and the halfling lore. So
the elves literally protect a tree.
Well, the rangers protect the tree, not the druids. Not the druids.
Oh my god.
The rangers protect the
Whatever.
tree. Druids are like, they're out there doing like circle magic, fairy circle magic or something like that. I don't know.
Fine. Whatever.
We'll see how it plays out. We'll update you on Sunday during the premiere to see who won.
Chris Rowan's got my back. That's what really counts. He came into the server.
I'm glad you mentioned
specifically.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Vote.
Yes, he was enticed by the MMO March Madness, which is amazing. So if you don't know, Chris Rowan is VR's CEO. I was at work. I saw the Discord. I'm like, oh, hey, look, that's cool. And he was like, who do you, talking about the voting and like which class and which.
It's great.
It was so good.
It's so fun.
Hilarious. So yeah, that's going on right now. Get in there and have some fun with us. Tuesday, this coming week, of course, 9 p.m. The MMO 101 team is still going strong, doing Lotro. We won't have a Thursday show this week because I'm going to be out of town. So no 201 group. So you'll have to just get your laughs with the 101, although they provide plenty of them, so it shouldn't be a problem. And then the week next, a little preview for the week after this is when we start rating. So make sure you're ready for that. Going up on our website, or sorry, I should say on YouTube, is Benonai's next audio recording of his fan fiction. This is Amensols' Focus, the Fox and the Wolf. So he's been putting up those recordings on his YouTube channel consistently, and they're great. Definitely worth a listen if you don't want to read the fan fiction. You'd rather just get it in audio form. And on Friday, our friend Redbeard Flynn is putting up a video called How WoW Killed MMOs. So I'm sorry that Redbeard's channel is officially going to be dead after this week. It's unfortunate news because he's decided to go with this topic that certainly isn't going to attract any kind of hate. At this point,
he is asking for it. At first, I was like, Red, I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry. But now, I mean, this is a call to attention. I'm just kidding.
This is poking the bear, man. This is like looking to see how far he can push those boundaries because this is going to be hilarious. I can't wait. I might not watch the video. I'll just look at the comments. I don't care about I will watch the video, but the comments are going to be great on this. So bring it. Let's see what everybody has to say. So make sure you're subscribed to Redbeard's channel, and if you're not, to catch that. So. Yeah, busy week, and that is it for this week's VR News and Notes.
The Pantheon community is full of cool projects, new people, and things that are just worth sharing. What's this over here? Look at that. So let's see what we can find in this week's Community Spotlight. Just one thing for the Spotlight, surprisingly. Just one, well, kind of one thing, but we already mentioned, Benonai's putting up the Fox and the Wolf. And this last week he put up part 3. And I'm really growing to love the little poems at the beginning. It reminds me of some fables, Oh,
nice. Yeah, they're very cool.
But yeah, another excellent entry in there this last week, and look forward to the one this coming week. He's doing a great job with those, and just because there's not much in the way of content for the Spotlight this week, and I mean we took a lot of time with the interview stuff, but I do want to just do a quick shout out because we haven't done this in a while, but like to welcome RSM Lord, Masumi, and Hermit Craig into the community. They all posted introductions on the introduce yourself section of the official Pantheon forums. So
wow, how long has it been since we've had a chance to do those introductions on the forums? I don't go to the forums as much.
To be honest,
I really need to get back over there.
They almost never they're never posted. Yeah. So yeah, but we happen to have a little cluster of them, so I wanted to shout it out. So if you want to go over, say hi, welcome them into the community. I linked the subforum in the description just to make it easy for you. Yeah, that's going to be it for this week's Community Spotlight.
Sit back and relax. It's time for The Lore You Know. All right, so when VR first told us about the Aridola a few months ago, I have to admit, I had a hard time getting a sense of it, who they were and where they fit into the lore of the world that I feel like I know. I felt kind of distant from the tale, almost like it was written in a bit of a different language and one that I didn't really understand. So what I wanted to do was sort of just let it sit, right? Let's let it be for a while, come back to it when I was ready to sort of push for a deeper understanding of it. But as time went on, I really wasn't feeling that sort of desire. So I kind of wondered, how can I get there? What do I need to do? And the answer, as it turns out, is actually here, reading it for this show. Yeah, applying that nice little ambient sound underneath it, getting some sound effects, and articulating the ideas actually just vocally has revealed the story to me as I hoped it would. So I really wanted to do this. It's a long one, so this is going to take a few episodes to get this all read, but I really wanted to bring this to the community, bring this to you, everybody, as well. So join me as we begin the tale of the Aridola, a people of Terminus, as written by VR's lead writer, J.N. Gerhardt. There are stories woven into the fabric of Terminus that are barely remembered, even by the people who first told them. If not for the infinite record of deities like Osirico, or the studious searching of keepers, the majority of most lives would be forgotten. That is the nature of the fallen. They are mortal, and thus fleeting, rising and falling like grass, needing the archives of the immortal to keep their memory alive. A memory is an oddly shaped thing. In your mind, it can be grasped, like a well-weighted stone, the sort that feels good to toss in your hand as you amble beside a river. To your companion, however, that same memory is also a stone, but hot and heavy in their palm. It radiates, perhaps with joy, perhaps with pain, alive in a way that your stone will never be. To observers, it is the same stone, the same moment shared between friends, but when either of you hold it aloft, that memory might as well be two different events. Among the most ancient races of Terminus, there are shared legends that also reveal the deepest of differences. Stories that burn hot and heavy to one people, cold and lifeless to another. Then there are tales unremembered, shuttered off, drifting wordlessly to the bottom of the river until someone else picks them up further downstream and asks, I wonder what this is about. The Aridola are a people born of that question. Of their own history, they know very little, and share even less, instead stewarding the wisdoms of the forgotten peoples of Terminus. This tradition is not by accident or oversight, but rather by intent. In fact, the Aridola are said to be the very people who seeded a now widespread belief that maps invite misfortune, or, more plainly, that a map is simply bad luck. To this day, the Aridola believe that any link to their own past will only invite the unspoken horror that dwelt within it. With this dour introduction, you might assume the Aridola are a shadowy, suspicious people, but that could not be further from the truth. Their culture is shaped by dance and song, surrounded in myth and mysticism, alive with joy and hospitality. Living in nomadic tent villages called Woda, the Aridola have no permanent home, no nation they hail from or land they will someday return to, nothing but their Woda and peoples to protect. They subsist off a mixture of their own provisions, limited harvesting of resources, and trade with locals. Thus, it is said that as long as there are birds in the air or fish in the sea, the Aridola will have a place to dwell. They've never met a stranger, have few foes, and even have a legacy as bear trainers, at times being seen riding the great Ogrim. This is where the Ari portion of their name is believed to have originated, for they did not give the Aridola title to themselves. Aridola myths and stories are shared only by oral historians. This practice has its roots in a great diaspora of the people who became the Aridola, when their great storehouses of wisdom were utterly destroyed. That which they could not carry in their hearts and minds was lost forever. Therefore, the practice of storing wisdom and knowledge in the indestructible vault of the soul became one of their few enduring traditions. Losing most of their own history, the Aridola began to memorize and share the lost narratives of cultures found in their travels, instead of remembering their own. Music often accompanies the sharing of these narratives and is a foundational aspect of the Aridola culture. Drums, stringed instruments, and flutes, as well as hybridizations of these instruments, many of which are not duplicated in the rest of the world. Dance and song attend every gathering, mixing their own style along with those of cultures they have invited in. While Aridola Woda have variations throughout the globe, most share these basic customs. Thus, it is not uncommon for members to stay with one group for several months or years before passing on to the next. The Aridola tale is not complete without at least mentioning their seaborne counterparts, the Detadola. While little is known about the Aridola past, Far less is even suggested about the Aridola, aside from how they exist today. Dwelling in waterbound equivalents to Woda, the Aridola spend their entire life on the sea in communities of rafts, ships, and even floating chunks of land. Aridola and Aridola use a term similar to cousin to describe each other, but aside from a mutual warm and hospitable nature, they have little in common. While Aridola may move from one Woda to the next, a transition from Aridola to Aridola is far more difficult. Life on the open sea seems best endured if begun in childhood, while few Aridola can tolerate life on land. This is due to the months or even years of land sickness, where the relative stability of the land works against the Aridola seaborne equilibrium. The Aridola no doubt have their own tales of the sea, but carry little of the storytelling fervor of their land-based brethren. And that is the lore you know. And that's the end of the show. Now, I didn't mention it in the news and notes section, but we also will not be having a rewind next week. So I'm going out of town on Thursday next week and not getting back till Sunday night. So
yep.
Definitely not able to do this show. So we have to take a week off, unfortunately.
We've had a good run. It's been a while since we had a week off. So
yeah. I feel like it's definitely few and far between that we do. But hopefully everything we talked about today, we had a little bit of a nice long conversation about the interview and then some lore and all that good stuff. To keep you satisfied until that time. The week after, actually, when we get back, the next show should be a really good one because we've got Nefel coming up on the VR monthly developer update. And talking some crafting and gathering updates. So, man, that's going to be.
I think it's going to be big. I mean, Nefel likes to tease a lot, but in this case, I know a lot's been happening, on that front. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's going to be good.
I feel like he's got a bag full of goodies for us. So, looking forward to that. But as always, we appreciate everybody who's here and supports the show. We appreciate all the feedback and comments. I want to say on the video from our pre-alpha stream, it was really interesting this whole week. Desiree and I were talking before we started recording, just love reading all the comments, all of it, the good, bad, and the ugly. Well. Maybe not the ugly so much, but we like most of it. But really, for the most part, it's just inspired. It's been so nice to hear what you guys thought of it, and really, mostly for the most part, seems like everybody liked it. So very encouraging. But let's leave it there. So I will say, have a great week. Have a great 2 weeks. We'll see you in a couple weeks, everyone. Have a great one.
See you then, everybody.